How's it going, everyone? This is Jack here with the Commander's Wire, and welcome back to another video. We have some more news that we're going to break down, as well as some potential hirings, as well as free agent acquisitions that could happen in the next couple weeks. If you're not already subscribed, please go down below, subscribe, turn on post notifications, as well as drop a like on this video. It really helps me out, and it tells me that you guys are very interested in videos like this, and allows me to continue posting videos about news, rumors, and other things happening with the Washington Commanders. So without further ado, let's get right into our first topic. It was reported yesterday from John Keim that Washington is hiring Danny Etling as its assistant quarterbacks coach, as the source confirms. Etling played professionally from 2018 to 2025, and this will be his first coaching position. He spent 1 year at Purdue with David Blau. Actually, I'm pretty sure it's 2 years. I think that's a typo. Then he spent 2 years at Purdue with David Blau, as well as spending a couple years at LSU before being drafted to the Patriots. Thankfully, Danny Etling is not being hired for a very high-end position. He's only going to be the assistant quarterbacks coach, working with recently hired DJ Williams to help out with the development of Jaden Daniels. So I think that since Danny Etling has a very strong connection with offensive coordinator David Blau, this could be a very good hire. He has a lot of experience with David Blau, especially with how David Blau runs things, as well as he's had a lot of experience being kind of a journeyman backup around the league over the last 7 or so years. So he has a taste of every type of offense, whether it was with the Patriots, the Falcons, the Seahawks, the Vikings, the Broncos, the Packers, the Jaguars, and even the Michigan Panthers of the UFL. So he's been around the league quite a while. He's worked with many different offensive coordinators, many different offenses, and he has an idea of how they all work, being that he was a backup for all those teams. So I believe that type of versatility when it comes to designing an offense, as well as being a recent player in those offenses and having that fresh in your mind, really can help out, being that he is just the assistant quarterbacks coach and can really connect the dots for Jaden Daniels as he's working with offensive coordinator David Blau, as well as quarterbacks coach DJ Williams. So I think that this could be a very low-key type of hire. It will have a lot of meaningful impact for Jaden Daniels as well as the rest of this offense. The next thing I wanted to bring up is it looks like the Commanders are ideally wanting to target Jeff Ulbrich, who was recently the Atlanta Falcons defensive coordinator, to be their new defensive coordinator, or at the very least interview him. Unfortunately, the Cowboys have also requested an interview with Jeff Ulbrich, but the Falcons decided to deny the request to allow the Cowboys to interview Jeff Ulbrich, since Jeff Ulbrich has been very productive this past season, developing very young players for the Atlanta Falcons and bringing them to a defense that has been more than competent for this season. It seems that the Atlanta Falcons are not willing to let go Jeff Ulbrich just yet, since they hired Kevin Stefanski to be their new head coach a couple days ago. They're deciding to keep him to see what Kevin Stefanski wants to do, and if Kevin Stefanski wants to keep him, they are not going to allow him to walk to another team. But if Kevin Stefanski wants to take a different route and choose his own defensive coordinator, there will be a chance that the Washington Commanders could scoop him up and have Jeff Ulbrich be our own new defensive coordinator. We saw what James Pierce Jr. as well as what Jalen Walker did as rookie edge rushers for the Atlanta Falcons and how productive they are. And that's a big need for the Washington Commanders coming up into the 2026 season. So I wouldn't be surprised if Jeff Ulbrich, if he is let go from the Atlanta Falcons and he lands himself here in Washington, that we spend an early round draft pick on getting a edge rusher to allow Jeff Ulbrich to use his magic and turn them into very productive players in our defensive front. And speaking of the defensive coordinator position, I was watching the Seattle Seahawks and San Francisco 49ers game last night, and we could all tell the Seattle Seahawks defense was absolutely amazing. Obviously, some of the touchdowns that the Seattle Seahawks were scoring were not all from offense, so the score was didn't really show exactly what the game was. The first touchdown for the Seattle Seahawks came on a kick return touchdown from Rashid Shaheed in the early seconds of the game, so the score would have been, without that play, would have been in the mid-30s to 6, which is still a very, very high margin. But we saw the Seattle Seahawks defense was absolutely disgusting, stopping everything the 49ers were running, and it even got to the point where the Seahawks put in their backup quarterback, Drew Lock, for the end of the game because they didn't want to allow their starters to be in for too long and potentially get injured. So it was straight BTA in my opinion, and we could see how good the Seattle Seahawks defense is. The secondary was amazing the entire night, not letting anything get past them. and causing a lot of 3-and-outs the whole entire game. So bringing in a guy like Carl Scott, once the Seattle Seahawks either lose in the playoffs or even they win the Super Bowl, a guy like Carl Scott, even without much play calling experience, the way that he shaped the secondary for the Seattle Seahawks and developed even these low draft picks or even undrafted free agents into capable and elite starting players, could really help out the Washington Commanders, whether it be continuing to develop Mikey Sainristil and Trey Amos, or bringing in some of the guys that were in Seattle that are pending free agents, whether it be at the safety position or even at the cornerback position, whether it's Tariq Woolen or maybe even a guy like Josh Jobe, who I believe are going to be pending free agents after the end of this season. And if Carl Scott is hired, I would not be surprised if Carl Scott is able to poach some of these guys that he's coached over the last couple of years to come to Washington and really beef up this secondary and allow the defense to be as good as it once was last year. And you pair a guy that has a lot of experience in the secondary with Carl Scott, with a head coach in Dan Quinn, who really spent a lot of the time in the trenches. We could have a very, very productive overall defensive unit with a 4-2 front, having 5 defensive backs, or even bringing in a nickel on the line of scrimmage, stacking the box even. They can get really, really creative with how they want to run their defensive scheme, and I can see Carl Scott, even though not having a lot of experience calling plays, if we're able to surround him with as much talent as possible, I think that talent could really overhaul this defense, because at the end of the day, the defense is only played how the players play, if that makes sense. You can have the best defensive coordinator in the world, but if you don't have talent playing the game, the defense is going to struggle, right? So I think as long as Adam Peters is able to fill the defensive side with as much talent as possible, mixing in some young guys as well as some older, more seasoned veterans, not veterans as in their 35, but maybe in their late 20s, or even bringing in some productive guys from last season, like bringing back Dietrich Wise, who, even though is old, he does very well stopping the run, setting the edge on early downs, and on the opposite side of Dorrance Armstrong being very productive in the run game. So bringing in a guy like Carl Scott would be, I think, very productive, and pairing him with head coach Dan Quinn could turn out for the best if we're not able to land any of these bigger names like Brian Flores or even Jeff Ulbrich. And lastly, I want to go over something that I saw from The Athletic. It was something very interesting that I wanted to show you guys. So, per The Athletic, Colts wide receiver Michael Pittman Jr. may have to restructure his contract in order to avoid having to play elsewhere in 2026. So, The Athletic says he basically admitted after the Colts' regular season finale that he might have played his last game for the franchise, being the Colts. The veteran wide receiver has $29 million in cap hit in 2026, but if the team releases him, they'd clear $24 million in cap space with only $5 million in dead money. With that in mind, Michael Pittman appears to have two options: either restructure his contract or play somewhere else in 2026. Now, obviously, Michael Pittman, he's not the oldest wide receiver in the world. However, he's also not the youngest wide receiver in the world. He's had a lot of experience in the NFL playing with the Colts over the last couple years. Michael Pittman was drafted in 2020 in round 2, pick 34, by the Indianapolis Colts out of USC, being University of Southern California, not South Carolina. Right now, he is 28 years old, which could be a red flag, as Adam Peters has promised that we're trying to get younger as a franchise. He's 6'4", 223 pounds. And as of this season, he's had 80 receptions on 111 targets, totaling 784 receiving yards. That's 9.8 yards per reception, and 7 total touchdowns. His longest reception being 27 yards, and that looks to be about it for his statistics as of this season. So we all know, if you're a fantasy football player, one sleeper waiver wire pickup was Alec Pierce, who is kind of that wide receiver 2 for the Colts. However, he his bread and butter was on the outside, the go ball, right? I think he had the most yards per attempt or something like that. The fastest to 1,000 yards with the lowest amount of receptions or something like that. Basically, all of his receptions came from a minimum of 30 yards or something like that. He's a guy that's on the outside running a go route, and Daniel Jones just dropped an absolute bomb 30-40 yards down the field where Alec Pierce caught the ball. And because of that, I think Michael Pittman kind of was phased out a little bit. He only had under 800 yards this season. I'm not saying that he's not the wide receiver one. However, because of how much money he's getting paid, the Colts could make a business decision and decide to cut him in order to save cap space. Alec Pierce would turn into that wide receiver one. They would obviously have to give him a new contract since Alec Pierce is a pending free agent. But they would give him that new contract. They have all the money coming off the books from Michael Pittman Jr., and they would probably spend an early first or second round pick on a potential wide receiver 2 to pair up with Alec Pierce as well as Josh Downs. So, could the Commanders bring in Michael Pittman Jr. if he is cut this offseason? I would think they could. He would obviously be the wide receiver 2 besides Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin would make his money probably being in the Alec Pierce role, being that he is a go ball route runner. I think Terry McLaurin is a jack of all trades. If you need him in the slot running, shifty routes, he can do that. If you need him on the outside, beating his guy man to man, he can do that. He can do anything you want him to do, depending on what receivers you pair up with him. So if you get a guy like Michael Pittman Jr., he would obviously go on the opposite side of Terry McLaurin. Michael Pittman would run those shorter intermediate routes, slants, digs, more kind of sitting in the middle of the field, where he can beat his guy, contested catches, and be physical, while Terry McLaurin will be on the opposite side, beating his man to man, whether it be in crossing routes, fades, go balls, anything like that. I think they'd be very productive. Now, what would you do for that wide receiver 3? Luke McCaffrey will be coming back from an injury. He could play in the slot, running those short intermediate routes where he can always get open for Jaden Daniels, and use his kind of quickness to open up the short yardage side of the field, where Michael Pittman can open up the intermediate side and Terry McLaurin can open up 15-20 yards out. Now, going back to Michael Pittman, he's able to win on the outside. He's able to win on contested catches, and just be a really reliable target in the NFL. He's a very strong frame, being 6'4", 223. He's a physical pass catcher. He's good at route running. He has very reliable hands, and he has some decent power after the catch. However, he does lack elite deep speed. Like I said before, Terry McLaurin would turn into that deep route guy, while Michael Pittman would turn into that intermediate route guy, digs, slants, stuff like that. With that, he doesn't really have elite burst. He's not very super explosive. If he's getting pressed man to man, I doubt he'll be able to beat his guy with speed. So I think that he is not always good after the catch. However, he'd be a good route runner in the intermediate part of the field. So that's something to think about for the Washington Commanders. Would he take a deal, less than $20 million while he's already getting paid almost $30 million? I don't know. I think he'd rather just restructure his contract, get paid a little bit of money, and just stay with the Colts where he's already thriving. So just something to think about for Adam Peters and Dan Quinn over the next couple weeks when free agency starts, which I believe is at the beginning of March. So it could be something that they can look to if he is potentially cut by the Colts, being that we have, if the proper cuts are made with like Marshawn Lattimore, maybe even trading Deron Payne, we could have almost $100 million in cap space for the 2026 offseason. So could be a name to watch out there. I don't think this is very likely. I think they'd probably go after a guy like Romeo Doubs or maybe even Alec Pierce if Alec Pierce doesn't want to stay in Indianapolis, depending on how much money he wants. I think those would be guys that they would rather target on the contrary to Michael Pittman Jr. So that's going to be it for today, guys. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. Let me know down in the comments, would you guys want to see Michael Pittman in the Washington Commanders uniform, or would you rather Adam Peters and Dan Quinn target somebody else? Go down in the comments and let me know. I appreciate you guys watching till the end. While you're down there, drop a like, subscribe, turn on post notifications to know when I post next. I really appreciate you guys. God bless, and hail to the Commanders.